the last video, I talked about European economies in trouble, and this time I'm going to talk about the Mario Draghi report. Now, those of you who don't know Mario Draghi, here's a little bit of his bio. He was the head of the European Central Bank. He was Prime Minister of Italy. He became Prime Minister when Italy was in a financial and economic crisis. He's a technocrat. He's not really a politician. He's an economist. He's an academic. He has worked in Goldman Sachs. He is part of the European establishment. And he published a report called The Future of European Competitiveness. And this is a nearly 400-page report. It was commissioned by President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, a powerful German politician, and indeed the big boss of the EC, known to the European Commission. EC stands for European Commission, known to have a big personality. And what this report shows is that the European elite are cognizant of the crisis in Europe. And this report is a remarkably well-written report because it's so candid. And it accepts that there is low Chinese demand, there is high energy, there is American protectionism, there is declining demography, there is slowdown of productivity growth. All of these things that economists have been talking about, they accept. And they say, why? Why is all of this happening? And they say, well, look, I mean, there's greater competition abroad, lower access to overseas markets, and now Europe has to change. And what does that mean? Well, one of the points they make is that there's a major innovation gap. Europe has to become more innovative. Europe has to be more productive. Europe has to integrate capital markets because European companies go to banks and raise debts. American companies go to capital markets and can issue debt. So a lot of their funding comes from capital markets, which are deeper, which lower the cost of capital, and which make the American economy extraordinarily dynamic and American companies very competitive. Now, an important thing this report points out is that in the last 50 years, no European company has achieved a market capitalization of over $100 billion. In contrast, the US has 6 companies which are valued over $1 trillion, and they all began relatively recently. Meta, of course, which owns Facebook. Alphabet, of course, which is basically Google. Apple, Amazon. You get the idea. Basically, the big global giants, the big empires of today, the equivalent of the British East India Company, which once ruled much of the world, or a large part of the world, and dominated the global economy like a colossus. Now all those companies dominating the global economy are all American. Not one of them is European, and Europe in particular has been left behind in technology. In technology, Europe is nowhere, despite having a pretty decent university system and despite having some of the top talent in the world. And what is happening is that European startups, including German startups or French startups, they go away to America, they incorporate there, and they become American companies. So there is a loss of talent. The brain drain that affected only the developing world or the emerging markets has now started to affect Europe too. So the solution, the Draghi report says, is, well, we should have an industrial policy, and an industrial policy which is 800 billion euros. And it should go into areas of technology where Europe has a comparative advantage. For instance, Airbus industry is doing very well. Boeing is not. So clearly in aviation, Europe has an advantage. In many defense technologies, Europe is good, although defense markets are fragmented. So bring them together and make sure that there's consolidation, and make sure that Europe comes up with defense companies that, if they do not and cannot compete with the Americans because Americans have a huge budget for the Pentagon and massive advantages when it comes to just the size of R&D and the great advantage they've built over many decades. At least Europe improves dramatically, but that will require consolidation. He also argues for, or his team, which he led to produce the report, argues for a consolidation of the banking markets. And we can see some of the trend. UniCredit is trying to take over Commerzbank. I hope I've got that right. An Italian bank trying to take over a German bank, and there's resistance. But his point is you need to consolidate these financial markets, and once you do so, then funding can be accessed from around Europe. He also talks about having partnerships with universities, with labs, getting them quicker to market, and inviting talent from other parts of the world, India, China, maybe not China, Taiwan, elsewhere. And the idea is Europe has a very high quality of life, and in areas where there's a talent gap, Europe needs to have special programs to attract talent, because a lot of people might prefer to live in Europe than elsewhere in the world. And there are many, of course, who like the European way of life and would prefer to move away from, say, the US to a place like the Netherlands or Switzerland. And some of my own friends have made that move. So all in all, Mario Draghi has told the European Parliament that either Europe will perish, or it will stagnate, or it'll reform and it'll improve. And it doesn't have the option of sticking its head in the sand anymore. And some of the reform will be painful, but as they say, you cannot make omelets without breaking eggs.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.